Hey there guys, this is Victor with Victor JKU. We're back for part 2 of the custom front tube flare build that I'm doing for Project Vector. Let's get into it. Alright guys, so in the first video what I went through was how I was building the base structure and how I went about doing it. Creating the 3 pieces, tracing them from a cardboard template, moving over to steel, figuring out the bends that were necessary to make a contour to the inner fender structure, and then figuring out how I was going to mount it to the structure along with welding 3 pieces together. Today, what we're going to be jumping into is actually cutting the tube, welding it on, and making the tube structure of the fender flare and capping it all off. So I already went ahead and started cutting the tubes, and I've already got a game plan for how I want to go about building this. I know that I'm going to be doing 5 posts that are going to be coming off of the body, basically perpendicular, not quite perpendicular. I have the 10-degree taper that I'm going to be cutting to match what I did with the rear tube flares as well. So I have my first piece that's going to be mounting to the 40-degree bend on the lower piece. That guy's going to be coming out. Right now I have him cut about 4.5, 5 inches. And then for the other ones, I have these guys all cut to about 6 to 6.5 inches. So I'm going to be doing my first post here, second post at this bend, third post at this bend, and I'll have my fourth post somewhere in the location between these 2 fasteners. And then what I'm planning on doing is I'm going to put an extension forward, and I'll have my final 5th bend coming out the front. I'll do a little bit more work up in that front end, but I haven't fully figured out exactly how I want that to go. I think I have a game plan in mind, but what we're going to do is we're going to show you how I'm starting off with building from the rear of the fender flare forward. Alright guys, so this first tube is a tricky one. So I had to first match it to the 40-degree bend of this surface, and also because that's such a steep angle that I had to add a perpendicular cut so that it could mount flush to this piece. So this is basically kind of the profile that you see that I had to do. So first I started off with my 40-degree cut, and then I came in, I first did a straight cut across the top, but I had to come back and go at an angle because I want this to still kick forward a little bit. So basically how this works out, and it's not perfect, so I didn't like exactly the angle that this all worked out. Basically how much it's pointed forward as well as how much it comes up at an angle. I want to be a little bit more level, so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to position it down just a little bit and rotate it, and that's going to get me a little bit closer. So I'll have a little bit of a gap on the back and the front that I'll need a little extra weld, but that's okay. So I have a general idea approximately where I want this one to be. So this guy's good to go, and I'm ready to go ahead and tack him in. As far as the next 3 posts go though, basically what I did here was, again, I just did the 10-degree taper on the one side, the other side is perpendicular to the tube, so 90-degree cut. The 10-degree is so that it matches what I did for the rear, so it's not a flat fender look. It'll actually have a little bit of a taper downward, kind of similar to how the factory fender flares are. What I'm going to do is very similar to what I did with the rear. I'm going to basically figure out the approximate location, figure out what that point is, and I'm going to figure out the angle back in. And I'm going to rotate this so the 10-degree is pointing basically halfway between where the next leg is and where the first leg is. So that way the angle is coming straight down back towards the tire. Now one thing I'm going to do, rather than having the tube pushed all the way to the edge, I'm going to leave it in just a little bit, maybe about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. That'll allow me a good amount of surface that I can weld to on the backside, and then when I put in my cap plate, that will also come in, and it'll give me a good surface that I can put a nice fillet weld in. So this is going to mirror for this piece, this next piece up here as well, and the following one right here. So basically what my game plan is I want my fender to start fairly tight to the body, not too tight. I want it to grow out, and then it's basically going to come straight, and it's going to stay parallel with the inner body structure, which matches fairly close to the hood. So that way, as you're moving forward, the flare is actually tapering in, so it gives more clearance to the tire as I'm approaching objects. I think ultimately that design is going to look the best. I think it's going to look really cool. So let's go ahead and start figuring out the layout for the tubes, figure out their locations so that I know where they are for when I need to transfer them to the passenger side flare, and we'll go ahead and start welding these in. Alright guys, so I just finished up cleaning all the tubes that I'm going to be welding to the base structure. And I also went through and I scribed lines with where all the tubes I want to be aligned. And basically what I did was I scribed a line essentially where the point of the radius is here, and that is going to be the angle that I'm going to rotate my tube to. I marked the high point and the low point of the tube as well with another scribe line. I'm going to use to align for my rotation of the 10 degrees, so I'm coming basically right along that line. And then I also marked a 1/4 inch from the edge of the material because I want to leave enough space there so I can go ahead and put a good amount of weld around the entire perimeter of the tube, and I'm not have to kick from welding to the face versus welding the seam if these two were kissed nice and tight at the top edge. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to be welding my 6-inch long tubes here, here, and up here. And then I have my shorter 4.5 that's going to be mounted in here. So I'm going to go ahead and tack each of these tubes into place, make sure that I like where they look, and then I'm going to start working on the connecting tubes after that. Alright guys, so we got the first 4 posts tacked into place. Basically what I did was just put 3 tacks on each one, just enough to hold it in place in case I have to modify, change any directions or anything, or relocate them a little bit. It's going to be easy just to cut off those 3 spot welds versus have to deal with more weld. So next up, what we got to do is start figuring out the connecting tubes that are going to be running between each of the posts, similar to how we did the rear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with measuring. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure outside of the tube to outside of the tube, because what I want to do is I want to actually cut the coins or those blanks so that I already have those ready to go, so I don't have to rely on material at the end that I have to cut and make those coins out of for when I go to blend each of these posts afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and measure here. So I'm just a little bit over 16.5. The next one just a little over 13.5. And this one is just a little bit over 12.5. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut those guys out. And then after that, what I need to do is I need to measure the inside to inside, which this guy's just under 13.1/8, just under 10.1/8. And this guy is actually gonna be a little bit different. I'm actually going to cut this one at a little bit more of an angle back. I'm gonna take a little bit more off this tube, I think. So this one's going to be a little bit trickier, and I got to figure that out. So I'm going to go ahead and work through that one, and I'm going to go ahead and get those guys notched and ready to be brought in. Alright guys, so I just finished up cutting and notching the tubes, so I have them all done. Basically these guys are just straight notches. Didn't have to do any angle play or anything with that, so these ones are pretty easy. So I have this one cut to length and notched, and he's ready to slip in, as well as this next one. And then for this last one, so this one got a little bit trickier. So I had to put a 7-degree angle on this side for the notch. I had to put a 17-degree on this lower one, and then getting them to be cut correctly. So you can see this one has a pretty extreme angle to it, and then this one is my 7-degree. So what I just got to do is slip him inside, put him into place, and that's where he's going to land. So this ties together the first portion of the fender flare tube structure, and I really like the contour so far. I think it's all looking pretty good. Definitely excited to start figuring out what I'm going to do on the front end now. So this is all kind of in place. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, I already have the post cut to match for the passenger side. I'm going to go ahead and make the matching connecting tubes for the passenger side as well. So now it's just time to think, how do I want to incorporate the rest of the front? So I'm going to get to work on that, see what I can come up with. Alright guys, so I just finished up getting the tubes cut and placed as I want for the front portion of the front fender flare. So this was probably one of the most difficult things I've had to do with tubing. Granted, it is all straight, but trying to get the notches, get everything to line up in space correctly. Because basically what I've been doing is I'm just building two posts that come off and I have to make one connection tube. Pretty easy, you just gotta measure between 2 points, throw it in there, you're good to go. But up in the front, things got a little bit more difficult because I'm trying to get a few different like geometries and shapes set up. So it was pretty tricky. So first thing was basically figuring out this outer portion. So I knew that I wanted to come a little bit more angled down than what this tube is, because it just kind of makes the flow of how the form of the fender goes, and I think it just looked a little bit better, because if I tried to keep it straight with this last tube, it looked a little off, and obviously I didn't want it to go up, so there was just a whole bunch of trying to figure that out exactly what I wanted to do. I also wanted it to angle in, because the hood is more or less straight to maybe about here, and it curls just a little bit more towards the front. It starts to become a little bit more of a curve. So it's definitely not straight, it is curved, but the curve is more gradual for the back portion of the hood, and it starts to wrap a little bit more. That, and I knew I wanted my fender flare just to start to taper in as well, because I thought, you come up to an obstacle, likely, if anything, I'm going to run into an area where I'm articulated and my body's flexing into a tree, it's going to be up in the front versus maybe up here. So I wanted it to kick in a little bit further so I had more clearance. So figuring out the angle downward and inward was a bit tricky. I had one tube that I had notched. The remaining length of that tube had a 7-degree notch on it. That ended up being a very good taper for what I wanted to do, so I just went ahead and ran with that. I had this tube cut to a longer length, and I was trying to figure out, okay, what do I want to do for what's going to come off the body, and then what do I want to do for the piece that's going to be parallel to the grill. So I knew that I wanted this front piece to be parallel to the ground, and I didn't know exactly where the height was. That was going to be determined by this tube. And then I was originally just going to make this so it was a square cut, but again, I had a piece that had a 45-degree cut already on it, and I put it in here, and I liked the way that it kind of looked, and it lined up really well with the direction of how this tube is angled in. And so the last thing was basically figuring out, how do I need to position this tube that's coming off of the body mounted structure or the mounting surface that I made? How does that need to be angled coming down, and then I can join these 3 tubes together. So I figured out that I needed a 45-degree cut on this one, and I was going to rotate it down, and I was able to use a laser level so that this front tube was level, and making sure that these guys were at the correct angle so that they would join together. And then I just had to notch both of these tubes to make it work where this guy sits in, and I'm setting this just a little bit back from the grill, and you'll see later when I bring the fender panel back in that I am leaving certain clearances in areas based on body lines and other things. So you'll see exactly why I put this where I did. I was originally thinking about putting it flush with the grill, but I decided to bring it back a little bit. I think this is going to look the best. The other complication with basically not only getting everything cut and fit into place, but how was I going to hold it so I could visually see if everything was going to line up right? Because I didn't want to go and tack stuff in, have to cut tacks if I didn't like how they looked, and go through an iterative process there. So basically what I came up with was a series of several magnets to basically hold it all into place. I used a piece of angle iron that's being magnetized down to the tie rod end, and I have a magnet that's basically supporting then this outer tube along with this magnet that keeps it joined and not moving from the post. I then used a series of 3 magnets to hold this piece in place, and then I used one more that basically is able to support this front piece between these 2. So with that, I was able to step back, look at it, evaluate, do I like the way that this is all looking? Do I like the flow? Do I think this is going to work? And with having everything just kind of mocked up into place, I'm thinking it's looking good. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take this apart. I'm going to make sure that I have all of the matching pieces cut and notched for the other side. That way I don't have to come back, get measurements and everything else once everything's tacked into place. Once I have all those pieces transferred, cut, and notched, I can go ahead and start tacking this all into place. So those are my next couple of steps that I'm going to work through. Alright guys, so everything is now tacked into place and everything is exactly where I want it. I like the way that it all looks, the flow of the tube flare and everything, so we're good to go ahead and start welding all the tubes together as well as welding the tubes to the base structure. And that's where I'm going to end this video. So next time, what we're going to get into is skinning the tube flare, making all the pieces that are going to cap off the top faces, as well as capping all of the tube ends and grinding it all down to give it its finished look. So be sure to stick around for the next video when that one comes out. Otherwise guys, I hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please hit that thumbs up button and give this video a like. If you have any questions, comments, or other feedback for me, drop those in the comment section down below. And for those of you that are returning subscribers, really appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching my video. And if you're not subscribed already and you're enjoying the content that I'm putting out, please consider subscribing. Help me grow my channel a little bit more by sharing this out to any other social media sites that you guys use, Facebook, Instagram, or other platforms. So, otherwise guys, I'm going to go and finish up with getting everything welded in here, and we will catch you next time. As always, we are Jeep JKU. We are taking on this build and the trails, both direction and magnitude. Alright guys, have a good one. Catch you next time.